Hello and welcome to Pixelfield podcast, where we talk about design, tech and innovation. Today's episode is about user testing and whether it can actually be dangerous to listen to what your users has to say.
What I wanted to talk about today is user testing, and I'm pretty sure that you're a huge fan of it. But
Yay!
in on some projects in past, I've also seen all the projects failed, and it was sometimes I think the main reason was user testing, and that it was
Really
tested too much or maybe in the wrong way. So I've recently wrote an article on this topic, and I'm not sure if you have read it already.
Yeah, I did.
So what do you think about it? Have you seen some cases where user testing actually was not a good idea, or when it was conducted in such a bad way that it ended up in that you ended up with some really misleading results?
Yeah, I personally, I don't think I did in such a way that you described. I think it would be good to then go back to your use cases or like case studies and talk about your experience. Because I mean, I'm a believer that if you, like, any user research is always better than non-user research. I think where problem arises is if you rely on user testing as your only form of research, but also when you try to apply user testing for when you actually need basically market research, because those are two different things. And I think this might be the case with one of your experiences or case studies. For our listeners that haven't read the article, could you maybe talk a bit more about that experience? Because it was, I think, really interesting use case.
Yeah, sure. It was a project we worked. It's I think about a year ago, and we were just hired as developers, and we were not involved in any way in the first stages of the project. So we just received the files and were asked to code them, and we had some concerns when we see where the project was heading, and but we really couldn't do anything at that point. The project was like implementation of a chatbot, and basically they wanted to sell the product via chatbot instead of like classical website. And they did a lot of user testing, they did a lot of user research, they did a lot of focus groups, and everybody told them that that's a great idea, and that they would 100% use this and so on. So I think there was several mistakes that they did along the way. I think the first one was that they really wanted to push this idea through, and I think that their questionnaires and their like methodology was focused on getting the results that they wanted and getting the answers they wanted to hear from the users. So basically, what happened is that we developed all the software, and it was not really a small project. The development itself took about 6 to 8 months, I think, and even it was a MVP. It was still a huge project, and there was not just this
6-7 months development of MVP.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It was very tricky, and
yeah.
If it was up to me, I would force them to release it sooner, something small, really. But there was like a lot of like text recognition, and we had to a lot of training of the AI or machine learning. So when it launched, basically it failed right away, which is something that we were afraid that might happen. And afterwards we got a bit underneath the process that was happening before, because they fired basically everyone in the startup, and they started again because it was backed by a really big company with a lot of resources. So they said, okay, we've done this wrong, and they just hired a completely new management, and they took it like completely opposite direction. They went back to the basics, and instead of selling the product via chatbot, they just scratched the whole chatbot and created a very basic website interface, like very old school, and they started selling slowly via that website. And it was I don't want to see fun. It was really sad to see something really go down like that. But it was very interesting lesson, let's say, because they hired a lot of telemarketers and support staff, and all those people were waiting for the launch of the product, and they were like super positive about it, and there was just like almost like none leads generated by this by the chatbot. So, and what we found out basically, or what we were told, because we still, even in the later stages, we were not really involved in the analytics of the project. So we only got some information that they wanted to share with us. Is that just people were just wanted really to do the basic stuff. They just wanted to browse the website. They just wanted to see the pictures, and they didn't want to talk to chatbot. They just were not ready for this. And for me, it was really weird, because I was curious how that could happen, because this is going to be interesting for you as well, because the prototyping part, I found out later, took a year before, and not just prototyping, of course, but like the preparation of the project and all the user research. This was a year of work. So the concept itself there was so many man days and man hours burned on that.
Yeah.
And the new manager basically told me that the company who was in charge they did not really do the user testing wrong. Good, sorry. So so I think this might happen from time to time, right? Because if you're really biased, and if I think that you have to interpret the results right, or the answers of the users, because if you don't, and if you just listen to what they will tell you and do it exactly, then you might end up with a really bad product in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I will reiterate your statement a little bit, and I would say, first of all, you have to get your questions right. And this is something that I see many people struggle with, and many designers and researchers struggle with, is that actually they don't ask themselves the basic question, which is, why am I even doing user testing? What is it I want to find out from user testing? And I mean, with the project you mentioned, there has obviously, at least it seems to me, like there have been so many things that went wrong. Like, if you build a prototype, or if you're working on a prototype for a year without actually building anything, because I don't know much about the project, but I know we were invited as the development technology partner, right? Yeah. And the first thing they ever built was what we built, which was after a year of prototyping. I mean, that's the first thing that's just crazy. I don't know how, what they did in that time, but I would guess in a year's time you can validate so many ideas. And I think bias might be a big factor in here, because I will tell you, if you use user testing with a bias of, I want to get this answer, you will always get it. If you go around and ask people, would you use this cool, amazing feature if I would give it to you? Everybody will say yes, because
I think,
why wouldn't they?
That's exactly, I think, what happened. And that's the other factor, I think, that played a major role there is because chatbots are cool, right? And it sounds interesting. Would I do this? Would I use the chatbot? And of course, you would say yes if you don't have to pay for the development of the chatbot. Yeah. But in the end, maybe there are some kind of products. Maybe it might be good for something. Maybe for checking when if your plane is on time, or something really contextual, really fast. But if you're looking for something that's more of an investment than something you buy on your way to work, then maybe you would still want to give it some more time and do some research and check a lot of options you have, instead of just being recommended one and paying for it.
Yeah. I mean, to go back to that project. What I think went wrong and what I would suggest to someone who might be listening and might be in like a very like similar phase of maybe they have an idea and they want to create a product. It's important to differentiate between two types of research, right? Which one of them is the actual user testing. Part of it is usability testing, but that's not only the one thing. The usability testing is when we test how basically are people able to use the thing we designed or we built. But there might be more forms of it. We can also use some very simple prototypes, even paper prototypes if we want to, or just interviews to talk to people. And I think this, what we call usually use testing, is good if you know exactly what your question is. If you have a problem that you want to solve and you very quickly bring a couple of solutions, you build a couple of simple prototypes or something, or it can be complex, it depends on your challenge. But basically this is good to get opinions of people that are unbiased with the product and just like to see how they use it, what they think of it and everything. But for the love of God, this shouldn't be your decision process or like the main reason to say yes to a big project. Because usually you test this with like a limited group, right? It's a part of qualitative research. And the other one that should happen and should have happened, I think, with this project is a product market fit, where user testing in its like qualitative way, in its normal way, which means that you sit with someone and give them a prototype to use or product to use, is the worst, I think, or one of the worst things to do in that case in many projects, because product market fit is a completely different question. Whether it's not, do you like this? Do you like how this looks? Do you like how you can use this? The question with product market fit is, are there enough people that will use this? Which the only way to test this out is to get it out to people and start tracking if they use it, but in more quantitative manner. And yeah, of course, you don't need 100,000 people, maybe, depends on the scale of your project, but still it should be more than 5 people that you usually get in user testing. And it doesn't matter if you do 30 sessions with 5 people, it's still just opinions, which are good if you want to create something, and they're necessary if you want to create something amazing. But you can't just create just based on validation of 3 random people.
Yeah, I think there was the other thing that's very strange about this project is that there was like simple working prototype, let's say, and they tested that one before they went to develop the full version. Yeah. And it kind of worked. Not really. They didn't really get the results that they expected, but they blamed it's MVP, right? So they just thought that it's going to be better when they come out with something that's going to be like more of a finished product. Yeah. And it was even worse than the first version, than the mock-up one. So yeah, it was pretty strange. And I think that sometimes, people recently, like developers and designers, there's a lot of talk about user testing. So a lot of people start doing it on almost every project. And so that also means that a lot of people are going to do it in a really wrong way. And that's something that might have happened here as well.
Yeah, I think, this will sound cliche, but sometimes it's really better to hire someone to do it, someone that is not on your internal team, that is not someone that is invested into really validating the idea, not so much invested in making your idea happen. Because
someone like us.
That's why I said it's a little bit cliche, maybe, because it is a bit of sneaky self-promotion. But it's true. It sometimes helps that, or at least get someone who does it professionally. Which in this case, there were professional researchers or designers working on this, right? Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to evaluate this project based on my limited knowledge, but the main takeaway is, I think for me, is user testing is great, but you have to know why you're testing and and just what you expect from it.
You have to see the data you get in a context of the also of the time that you're doing it, of the people that are invited to do it. So at this point, I think this wasn't like 2 years ago when there was like the first chatbots on Facebook and or Messenger. So it was like a really cool thing to do at the time, right? I don't think it's so cool anymore, but so that might be the thing, that they just really wanted to do chatbot. They really wanted to do something different. But on the other hand, what I was thinking about is sometimes you just really have a good idea and people just might not get it. Do you think that can happen as well? Do you think that there might be a client or that there might be a product that people just won't understand till they see it, like till they see the final version, till they see how it's really working?
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
Yeah, I've never had a project like that, but I hope that one day I could be working on some. But
I hope this doesn't happen, because I mean, it happens a lot. It didn't happen to me as far as I remember, because I think when it happens, then it's again a problem of having wrongly set expectations and doing something wrong, because or just basically the process is flawed, because it is possible, and I've designed many things that people didn't get, but the takeaway from that there are many takeaways that you can get from that. One of them is that the whole idea of the product is wrong, right? But the other might be that just your iteration of the product is wrong. And I think it's very important to, when you gather data like user testing or even quantitative data, it's very hard to get to interpret it in the right way, basically. So I would say, to answer your question, it can definitely happen that there is a product that people maybe only don't get, but you shouldn't make that assumption like every time user testing fails. You shouldn't just go back and think, oh yeah, they are dumb. They didn't get my product. They didn't get the vision, so I need to build it. I need to spend more money on it. And then they will finally get it. It's good to think about it, and it is an option that they didn't just get it. But in most of cases, they didn't get it because someone else did a poor job. The prototype was designed poorly, or the whole product is just designed poorly. The whole experience is designed poorly. That might be one option. Second might be that just the nature of the prototype is not fitting the nature of the product. So if you have, let's say chatbot, then it doesn't make sense to really test it with like a static prototypes that you can test the different products with. Because chatbot is about the actual conversational experience, right? And you can't really test it if only way to go forward is like linear. So that would be like another example. But yeah, I mean, in some edge cases, and there are a couple of them sometimes, I think you just have to listen to your like gut feeling and just maybe launch it. I mean, Steve Jobs was, I think, very famous with saying that people don't know what they want, so don't ask them. Just create the greatest thing for them and launch it, and they will learn to love it. And this is true to a certain degree, but even Apple did loads of testing. It was driven by vision. It was driven by belief that what they're doing and the way they're doing is the best. But there was still a lot of research on the way and loads of iterations to get it right. And I think this is something that people forget. Like what I've seen loads of times, that user testing fails, and that's done. That's like, okay, and let's do something completely different. And this is not what I would like recommend. This is not how it usually works. Like if your user testing fails, then first of all, find out what exactly failed. Was it that your prototype was completely wrong? Was it your target audience was completely wrong? Your testing scenario was wrong? Your initial assumption and question was completely wrong? What it was, and then iterate on it step by step. Try to come back to the user testing with something slightly better, with something that solves the problem you found you had before. And I think that's the way to go. If that make any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Have you ever had a client that was like really not willing to let go of his idea, even though the evidence was to the contrary.
Yeah, yeah. Loads of times, to be honest. Actually, it happens quite often, and yeah, sometimes it can be like really painful, and it's hard to really communicate that, or like to go through if you have someone that's attached to the idea, because very often people like that, they get defensive if you present the evidence to the contrary, and usually, like, I mean, it never happened to me that I would do a user testing and I would that would obviously fail, and even if I would find out that it failed, I would find the reason why it failed, and it wasn't the testing itself but something with the product. I always suggest what should be the next steps, right? That's how we always work as well. Basically, if we see a problem, we want to fix it. We just don't say, oh, there is a problem, so let's not do it.
How would you decide whether it's still reasonable to go on with another round of, let's say, design, or if it's just better to stop the work completely?
Yeah, that kind of brings me back to the previous point where there are two different kind of things to distinguish between, which is the product market fit and then the actual use testing and kind of the process of making a great experience, right? I mean, if there is a product market fit for what we are creating and we know it makes sense to create it, or maybe we don't know it makes sense, but we have a budget to do it, and somebody wants to prove it and spend some money on like creating something great, then I mean, it's just like no-brainer. You just have to iterate.
Do you think these are always separate things, though? Because sometimes I think that some product may only like sense in some reasonable quality or in some complexity, and you can't achieve that, right? Maybe in the first iteration. So
definitely
go ahead in that as well.
I agree with that. I mean, I would never probably recommend just doing one or two iterations. That in the first place, that's the thing. Like, it's good for maybe a simple MVP that where the concept is fairly clear and simple, and and maybe it's like a new thing, completely new way. It has some like unique value in it that is not just the experience itself. But if you're building product where the unique value is the experience itself, then obviously it needs loads of iterations to get that right and make it really, really better. That's why we mostly say no to like potential clients that come to us and say, oh, I want to create something like Airbnb, but just a bit better with this or that, because it's not as easy as most of people think. And I'm not saying that, for example, Airbnb is the only one that can create a nice property listing site or something like that. Not at all. There is still, I think, space to do something better than they're doing. At the same time, the likelihood is very low, right? And if you want to do something like that, you have to be prepared to spend loads of money and hopefully already have a business in that space that you will build on top of. But yeah, I agree. Sometimes, like, the product market fit relies on the actual experience, which then it's hard. Yeah, it's hard. Like, it's a combination of I think gut feeling and being able to like push for ideas and experiment and also have a good relationship with the client, obviously, that they allow you to do so. But at the same time, if you go to every use testing with the knowledge of what you're testing and why, and you set your KPIs right, like, for example, this feature is going to be a success only if, let's say, I don't know, 90% will do exactly this within 30 seconds or something like that, then it's usually clear. Obviously, it's not always possible, especially in our space, as we focus a lot on like early stage startups and basically projects where the resources are fairly limited most of the time. Then you don't have that luxury that maybe like a startup has, which is to iterate 10 times or something like that. But yeah, then it's, I think, loads of gut feeling playing its part, which is something I think that many people and many designers and generally like people around products kind of underestimate. I think there is a big trend now to rely on data, which I love. I love data so much. always love to work with like business intelligence teams, and I always like to use data to inform my decisions and everything. But especially in the early stage startup space we are in, you don't get the luxury of having data. And even if you have data, there is usually not enough resources to do a proper data science and really make sense of that data. So very often you have to rely on gut feeling and on really just, you need someone that will make the decision. And I think this is something that's very underestimated, which I think is wrong. And this can then make a difference. And we see it all the time. I don't have an example right now, but I know I read it all the time in different like tech crunches and so on. That the critical moment usually came where one of the founding team or someone just made a decision. A decision they didn't have 100% evidence for, but they just had to make a decision.
Yeah, actually, this was the point I was trying to make when I was writing the article as well. And user testing it's a great tool, right? And it's a great way how to get some information and get some feedback. But it's just one of the many tools one of the many things that you need to do when you're creating a new product or a new application, and you just cannot completely rely only on them. There are so many moving parts that sometimes you might agree with that, but sometimes you have to interpret data in a different way and maybe go with the product as well. So, yep.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree so much. Like very often the actual prototyping and testing happens in almost laboratory conditions where you're testing engagement and everything under completely different conditions than the final product should be. For example, you test engagement of something, but during your testing, the feature is free. But then you plan to actually roll it out as a paid thing. And I mean, this validates your whole research. Because if you're testing something under an assumption that it's free for the users, and then it's not, then you can basically test again because you've tested a completely different thing. And I think that's something that people forget is one of them. But as you said, there are many more sources to rely on, and you shouldn't make decisions just based on one of them. Whether that's use testing, whether that's data, just don't take it as a like only way to go. Experiment, have fun with it. I mean, it sounds horrible if millions of pounds are at stake, but yeah, it's necessary to some degree.
I also think that you can differentiate between things that are there are some questions that user testing can definitely like answer you clearly. For me would be like, is this kind of a, let's say, interface of shop better than the option B? And, but maybe the more like fundamental questions, if the product is going to be success, and if there is a demand for this, I think this is something that's really more complex and can just be based on the user testing.
Yeah, I agree completely. I don't know if that I probably didn't make that clear at the beginning, but if the question or the assumption we are validating is this product good, then I would not do the use testing in the first place. I would say no. We have to go back and we have to rephrase the question to be more specific, because that's what use testing is good for, to answer specific questions, not something as abstract as, is this good? Is this going to be useful? You need a crystal ball for that, and not use this thing.
Okay, I think we can end this episode. And if you guys want to read the article or some others, then you can follow us on Medium or take a look at our blog on our website. And thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Talk to you next time.